Yeah, I mean, historically, when you talk about a storm hitting, there's this expectation of visibility, right? You pull up the weather radar on your phone, you see that massive swirling blob of red and yellow churning off the coast, and you know exactly what's coming.
Right, exactly.
You know when to board up the windows because it's visible. It's totally predictable.
And, that visibility gives you the ability to prepare. You can track the timeline mile by mile, basically adjusting your strategy based on clear incoming data.
Yeah, but when you step into the world of global economics, and especially heavy construction, that weather radar is often just completely blank.
Oh, for sure. It's terrifying.
Right. If you're managing a massive project, the storms that are going to blow up your budget, they don't show up as swirling red blobs on a screen. They show up as tiny, seemingly disconnected data points in places you might not even be looking at.
Which is, the absolute definition of flying blind. In a highly interconnected global economy, friction in one heavily industrialized region inevitably grinds against the gears of another.
Yep.
So if you don't know exactly where to point your radar, you literally won't see the storm until it has already taken the roof off your project.
Exactly. And figuring out exactly where to point that radar, that is our mission for this deep dive today.
It's a fun one.
It really is. We are looking at a region that might seem, at first glance anyway, pretty far removed from a high-rise going up in Manhattan or like a new manufacturing plant being built in Ohio. We are talking about Central and Eastern Europe,
Yeah.
the CEE.
All right.
Specifically, we're pulling from a really fascinating source today. It's the CEE Infrastructure Lead, Global Construction Market Intelligence Report.
And I think to a lot of professionals listening, the CEE might feel like a purely regional market concern, like perhaps something only relevant if you were directly building a facility in Warsaw or Bucharest.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core premise of this intelligence report completely flips that assumption on its head. The data shows that construction stress in the CEE is not an isolated regional issue at all.
Not at all.
It is actually the canary in the coal mine for global markets. What is happening in the construction markets of Poland, Czechia, Hungary, and Romania right now, it's basically a crystal ball for the North American market.
Yeah, and this is a really crucial dynamic to understand because international construction cycles, they don't just happen simultaneously.
Right.
They do not turn on a dime globally. They act as leading indicators. The CEE region is deeply, deeply embedded in the European and global industrial supply chains.
Yeah, they're the engine room for a lot of it.
Exactly. So when their construction sector starts flashing warning signs, whether that's severe labor shortages or supply chain blockages or just skyrocketing operational costs, it sets a tone that eventually reverberates worldwide. It acts as the very first domino.
And the report calls this the time machine effect, which I just think is such a compelling way to frame it.
It really is.
It's not just that the CE is a canary in the coal mine. It's that we actually know the exact length of time between when the canary stops singing and when the mine collapses. Like, the leading indicator relationship detailed here is shockingly specific.
Yeah, the historical cycles lay out a very, very clear timeline. Consistently, what happens in the Central and Eastern European construction markets precedes Western European and North American cycles by exactly 12 to 18 months.
12 to 18 months. Now, I do want to push back on that a little bit.
Sure.
Because construction is a notoriously chaotic industry. Every single project has its own delays, its own weird zoning issues, its own weather problems. Can we really set our clocks by a 12 to 18 month lag? Or is this just, a statistical average that looks neat on paper but kind of falls apart in the real world?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the 12 to 18 month window is not a coincidence. And it's not just an average either. It represents the structural reality of how global project pipelines and procurement life cycles actually operate. Think about the mechanics of a massive infrastructure or commercial build.
Right.
When severe cost pressures hit a manufacturing hub in the CEE, it doesn't instantly halt a skyscraper that is halfway through construction in Chicago.
Oh, because the steel is already on site, right?
Yeah.
The glass is already purchased, and those contracts were locked in like 2 years ago.
Exactly that. The structural delay, that 12 to 18 months, is the literal procurement life cycle.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, it's the time it takes for new architectural designs to be finalized, for new bids to be drawn up by contractors, for procurement contracts to be heavily renegotiated, and for the actual physical supply chain shock to travel from a facility in Czechia to a job site in the United States.
Wow, okay.
You are basically seeing the buffer period between raw material or component production overseas and the actual installation phase domestically. It takes roughly a year and a half for the inflation embedded in a foreign supplier's operations to physically manifest in the budget of a newly breaking ground project in North America.
So the timeline is essentially just the physics of global trade playing out. Like seeing lightning and counting the seconds until the thunder hits North America, the storm is coming, and the delay is just the travel time.
Exactly. It's just travel time.
But to understand why this incoming thunder is going to be so disruptive, we have to look at what is actually brewing in those storm clouds over the CEE right now. The intelligence report highlights a massive divergence, specifically this crazy clash between labor and materials.
Yeah, and this divergence is where the current cycle starts to look very different and, quite frankly, significantly more challenging than previous inflationary periods.
Let's drill into those specifics. Because in Poland, Czechia, Hungary, and Romania, the data shows that labor cost inflation is accelerating much faster than material costs.
Yep.
And normally, when we think about a construction project going off the rails financially, we blame physical commodities, right? We talk about lumber prices tripling overnight.
Right, or a sudden shortage of concrete.
Yeah, or steel tariffs blowing up a budget. So why is the human element, labor, suddenly the dominant sticking point over physical materials?
Well, it comes down to the fundamental difference between commodity economics and human economics. The cost of materials can be highly volatile, obviously, but they often self-correct.
Okay.
Like steel prices might spike due to a temporary tariff, but they will inevitably drop 6 months later when global supply catches up or demand cools off.
Right. Lumber shoots up during a housing boom, but it crashes the absolute second interest rates rise and home building slows down.
Exactly. Commodities fluctuate. But wages, on the other hand, are incredibly sticky.
Because you can't really unring that bell. Like once you raise the baseline pay for a specialized electrician or a skilled welder to match local inflation, you can't just roll their wages back by 15% a year later. They'll simply walk off the job.
Which is the exact friction point we're seeing. In the CEE, you are looking at a region that has rapidly industrialized and developed over the last decade.
Yeah.
The standard of living is rising. Workers are demanding higher wages simply to afford the rising costs of housing, food, and energy in these growing industrial hubs.
Makes sense.
And on top of that baseline inflation, there is an absolute scarcity of skilled tradespeople. The specialized labor required to manufacture complex construction components requires years of training. It is not something you can just instantly automate or replace with unskilled workers.
And that localized wage inflation in specific hubs like Warsaw or Bucharest, it doesn't stay localized, does it?
It rarely does, no, because the European labor market is highly fluid. When you have wage inflation running this hot in Poland and Romania, it signals massive regional wage pressure.
Right.
If a highly skilled tradesperson in Warsaw realizes they can suddenly command a 20% premium, a contractor operating in Germany or France has to drastically raise their offers just to attract or retain that same talent pool. Yeah, the pressure ripples outward, and suddenly, the entire continent's labor floor has shifted upward. It fundamentally alters the baseline cost of executing any major project in the region.
Which really brings us to the crucial bridge here. For the listener sitting in North America, maybe managing a portfolio in Toronto or building a massive data center in Texas, the immediate question is, why does a wage spike in Warsaw matter to my bottom line?
Right.
This is where we have to talk about supply chain contagion.
And contagion is just the perfect word for it because it describes the invisible transmission of these costs. This is exactly how a labor squeeze in Eastern Europe directly inflates a project budget in the American Midwest.
Yeah, and to make this really tangible, it's kind of like baking, right? If the overseas factory that makes your highly specialized flour raises its workers' wages, the bakery in New York has literally no choice but to charge more for the bread.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. If the foundational ingredients cost more, the final product has to reflect that. It doesn't matter how beautifully designed your bakery is or how efficient your ovens are. If the supplier is running hot, your budget is going to run hot.
That is a very accurate way to model it. North American and Western European construction markets are heavily dependent on the CEE region, not necessarily for raw dirt and bricks, but for highly engineered, value-added components.
Okay.
The CEE region has strategically positioned itself as a major manufacturing hub for specialized construction materials.
we're talking about the complex guts of a building.
Precisely. HVAC systems, highly specialized electrical switchgear, complex curtain wall systems for high rises, prefabricated architectural elements, and custom elevator components.
Right.
The manufacturing capacity and the specialized engineering labor required to produce these items are heavily concentrated in countries like Czechia and Hungary.
So when the Market Intelligence Report analyzes this flow of goods, the takeaway is pretty stark. North American contractors aren't just importing physical materials from the CEE, they're actively importing the CEE's labor inflation.
They are importing the inflation directly into their budgets.
Yes.
If the Czech factory that manufactures the specialized switchgear for your project has to increase the wages of its engineers and floor workers by 30% just to keep the facility fully staffed, the cost of that switchgear goes up.
And as the buyer in North America, you have literally no alternative but to absorb that price hike.
Exactly.
And the report specifically dives into an interview angle regarding U.S. contractor exposure, which completely validates this entire mechanism.
Right.
Firms operating in the U.S. that have deep supply chain exposure to the CEE, they aren't waiting for a theoretical problem. They are reporting these exact specific pressures right now.
They are the ones currently watching the lightning flash. These highly exposed contractors are actively experiencing extended lead times. They are being forced into renegotiated supplier contracts midstream. Oh yeah. They're seeing sudden, aggressive spikes in component pricing. The contagion is already in the system. It's just a matter of how long it takes to reach the broader market.
Okay, so we understand the mechanism. We have the localized labor squeeze, and we have the supply chain contagion that acts as the delivery vehicle for that inflation.
Right.
But for a cycle to truly lock in, it needs atmospheric pressure. It needs macroeconomic forces that prevent the market from quickly correcting itself. So let's look at the geopolitical and capital headwinds the report outlines.
And this is where the regional labor dynamics get amplified into a structural global issue. The report identifies several severe headwinds acting simultaneously.
Okay.
You've got the ongoing Russia-Ukraine situation, shifting regional trade policies, the European Central Bank or ECB interest rate environment, and localized regional banking stress.
So what does this all mean mechanically? Because we obviously have to stay completely impartial here. We are just looking at the hard data of how these events impact the market. So how do these massive, abstract geopolitical concepts actually impact a mid-sized factory's daily operations? Let's walk through the actual friction on the ground.
Sure. If we connect this to the bigger picture, all of these geopolitical and macroeconomic factors combine to do one primary thing. They restrict available capital and drastically increase operational uncertainty.
Okay.
Let's break down the Russia-Ukraine situation first. Mechanically, having an active conflict adjacent to the CEE borders creates a massive regional risk premium.
Meaning investors just get really nervous.
Highly nervous. Foreign direct investment becomes hesitant. Lenders, whether they are international institutions or private equity, they demand significantly higher returns for taking on the perceived risk of funding long-term infrastructure or factory expansions in a geopolitically sensitive zone.
Wow. Okay. So instantly, money just becomes much more expensive to borrow.
Exactly.
And then you layer the European Central Bank interest rates directly on top of that risk premium.
Which acts as a huge multiplier. The ECB has kept interest rates elevated to combat broader European inflation. So let's take our hypothetical Hungarian factory that produces those highly specialized curtain wall systems for North American skyscrapers.
Right.
They see the incredible demand. They want to build a new assembly line, maybe invest in heavy automation so they can outgrow their labor shortage.
But when they go to finance that new assembly line, they are hit with the geopolitical risk premium, plus the elevated ECB baseline rate, making the cost of capital completely exorbitant.
Right. It becomes financially unviable to expand. And that is before we even factor in the localized regional banking stress mentioned in the report.
Jace.
Yeah, regional banks in the CEE, feeling the squeeze of the broader economic environment, are becoming incredibly conservative. They are tightening their lending standards. So even if our Hungarian factory was willing to stomach the massive interest rates, the local bank might simply refuse to underwrite the loan for the expansion.
So the supply remains artificially trapped. The North American demand for those curtain walls remains perfectly steady, but the CEE factory literally cannot secure the capital to expand their output or innovate their way out of the labor shortage.
Exactly.
And then you throw shifting regional trade policies into the mix, right? New tariffs, stricter export controls, endless new compliance paperwork.
all of which add layers of administrative cost and time delays. It creates a perfect storm. The factories cannot scale. Because they cannot scale, supply remains constrained. Because supply remains constrained while demand holds, prices have literally nowhere to go but up.
And because they are trapped, that 12 to 18 month timer we talked about earlier is officially ticking down for the rest of us. Which brings us to the inevitable conclusion of the report and the exact timeline you need to prepare for.
Yeah, this is where the macro-level data synthesis becomes highly actionable for the listener.
According to the intelligence report, the forecast is definitive. A significant cost inflation shock is highly likely to hit Western European and North American construction markets in Q4 2026.
Q4 2026.
Yeah, but here's where it gets really interesting. Because knowing the storm is going to make landfall in Q4 2026 means you have a distinct window to board up the windows. Smart contractors and developers aren't just sitting around waiting for this to happen. They are actively hedging their labor and material costs right now, well before the shock hits.
And that is the immense value of understanding a leading indicator. With high certainty that structural inflation is already baked into the overseas supply chain and is currently traveling across the Atlantic, you fundamentally change your procurement strategy today.
Right.
You stop reacting and you start maneuvering.
Let's break down the math of that maneuver. How exactly do you hedge against a labor and material shock that is still, over 2 years away? What does that strategy look like on the ground?
Well, one of the most effective shifts is moving away from just-in-time delivery models.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, just-in-time is incredibly efficient in a stable market, but it leaves you totally exposed to sudden price spikes in a volatile one. Smart firms are pivoting to aggressive pre-purchasing and warehousing of critical components.
So if you know that specialized electrical switchgear from Czechia is facing a structural 30% price increase by the time you actually need it installed in late 2026, you don't wait. You lock in a guaranteed maximum price contract today.
You buy it in 2024 or 2025, and you literally lease a storage facility to hold it until the project is ready.
Which might sound expensive at first glance.
Sure.
But if you run the numbers, the cost of leasing a commercial warehouse for 2 years, plus the insurance on the stored materials, is often a mere fraction of the cost you save by avoiding a 30% inflation hike on multi-million-dollar critical infrastructure components.
Exactly. You are paying a small premium to buy absolute certainty.
You are buying time.
Yeah. And that same logic of avoiding future friction changes how these firms approach labor as well. We are seeing a massive proactive investment in prefabrication and modular construction right now.
Because if you build it in a factory, you control the variables.
Exactly. By doing as much of the heavy assembly and complex engineering work as possible in a controlled domestic factory environment today, you drastically reduce your reliance on specialized on-site labor 2 years from now.
Oh, wow.
You are minimizing the exact variable skilled human labor that we know is going to be hyper expensive and incredibly scarce by Q4 2026.
You're essentially re-engineering your entire project timeline to completely bypass the storm, which really brings this entire analysis home for you listening. Whether you're a project manager trying to keep a massive commercial build from exploding its budget, an investor looking at long-term infrastructure portfolios, or just someone fascinated by how the invisible gears of the global economy turn, the takeaway here is incredibly stark.
It really is.
If you are not monitoring the Central and Eastern European market, you are quite literally flying blind into the cost cycles heading your way.
You are ignoring the most reliable radar available.
Absolutely. So, to do a quick recap of the journey we just took today, it starts with an aggressive, sticky labor spike in rapidly developing hubs like Poland and Romania, where the human cost of living drives up wages much faster than raw commodities.
Right.
That localized pressure creates immediate supply chain contagion, because the North American market heavily relies on that exact region for specialized, highly engineered components.
Yep.
Then you lock that localized inflation into place with severe geopolitical friction and tight capital markets that prevent those suppliers from expanding or automating. Add the structural 12 to 18-month lag of global construction procurement pipelines, and you arrive at a highly predictable, mathematically sound North American price shock hitting right around Q4 2026.
It is a massive chain reaction, and once you understand the underlying mechanics of it, it stops looking like market chaos and starts looking like simple, predictable cause and effect.
It really does. It takes that blank weather radar and suddenly paints a very clear, high-resolution picture of what is churning off the coast. But as we wrap up this deep dive, It makes me think about the very beginning of this whole process. We started by looking at the canary in the coal mine, right?
Right, which raises an important, almost philosophical question about global trade. If the Central and Eastern European construction market is our reliable 12 to 18-month leading indicator for North America, what early warning market acts as the leading indicator for the CEE?
Oh, wow. The canary's canary.
Exactly. Is there an even earlier domino in the global chain? Perhaps we should be looking at raw material extraction cycles in South America or the deep-sea shipping logistics out of Southeast Asia. Is there a metric out there that could give us a 3-year warning instead of just an 18-month one?
A fascinating thought to keep in mind the next time you're trying to see what's over the horizon.